أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So the topic for today is about hardships and the path to God. And they asked me, to choose a topic for a workshop, so naturally I chose this one. And the reason I really love this topic is because I think it's intimately connected to our path through this life and our purpose of existence. And when I say that, the reason why I say that is that we're told in the Quran that on the Day of Judgment, there's absolutely nothing that will benefit a person, not their wealth, not their children, not their possessions, nothing, except for the one, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, except for the person who goes or arrives at Allah, who ends up at Allah with a heart that is salim, with a heart that is sound, with a heart that is clean, that is healthy. And so what that means is what we need to do through this life is make sure that when we leave this life, we have purified our heart so that when we go in front of Allah, we are standing in front of Allah with a heart that is salim. So the question that we need to ask ourselves and what we need to be focusing on is how do we get that heart which is salim? And the answer to that question is through tazkiyah. Tazkiyah means to purify, it means purification. And so the whole idea, the whole focus should be on purifying our heart. Now, what does tazkiyah have to do with hardship? What does it have to do with struggle? There's actually a quote of Rumi, which I really love, and I'm going to share it with you, because I think it's a nice exemplification of this connection. He says that when someone beats a rug with a stick, he is not beating the rug. His aim is to get rid of the dust inside of the rug. Your inward is full of dust from the veil of I-ness, and that dust will not leave all at once. With every cruelty and every blow, it departs little by little from the heart's face, sometimes in sleep and sometimes in wakefulness. So what is this quote talking about? This is talking about the fact that when you undergo this hardship, this process of struggle or pain of any sort, that pain and that hardship is actually what is cleansing you if you go about it in the right way, if you react to it in the right way. That is the process of purifying you. How does it purify you? It purifies you by detaching you. What do I mean by that? Well, we go through this life, and what happens when we go through this life is we tend to get attached to the dunya. We tend to become in love with the dunya. We tend to strive for the dunya. And what happens with hardship, one of the results of hardship, is that it breaks that attachment to dunya. What happens, and this is an example that's given in the Quran. What happens to someone who isn't conscious of God at all? What happens when you put that person in the middle of an ocean and then a storm comes? Usually that person, even if that person never believed in God and never turned to God, at that point when they have no one else to turn to, when they're stuck in the middle of a storm and they have no one else to turn to, they will turn to God. That's when they turn to God. So now that storm that was given to that person, was it a blessing or was it a punishment? Exactly. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is this. When something comes to us that's difficult or that's painful or that's hard, and we have to struggle. Now, we hear about that sometimes the people in the past nations were punished, right? They were punished through hardship. But at the same time, we're told in the same Quran that hardship can be a purifier and a blessing. So then what we have to ask ourselves naturally is, well, how do I know if this hardship that I'm being given is a blessing or if it's a punishment? How do I know that how do I know if Allah is sending me this because He's angry with me or because He loves me? And the answer to that question has everything to do with the result. The answer to that question has to do with the result. What do I mean by that? What happened to you? What happened to your character? What happened to your relationship with Allah as a result of that hardship? If that hardship brought you closer to Allah, then that hardship was a blessing. It was actually a gift from Allah. And if that hardship brought you farther away from Allah and made you more ungrateful and made you more angry at Allah, then that was a punishment. Or perhaps it was a purifier for you. So how we define hardship has everything to do with how we respond to hardship. Now, in the Quran, there are different times when Allah talks about hardship and struggle and pain. And one of the times where Allah talks about hardship, He says what is translated as, and then this is an ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معهم متى نصر الله ألا إن نصر الله قريب. What is the meaning of this? This is such a powerful ayah. What it means is, أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم. Allah is asking a question to us, because the Quran is speaking to us. Allah is asking us a question. أم حسبتم, did you think that you would enter Jannah without having come to you what came, or without having you befall on you what befell those before you? Without having come to you what came to those before you. And then Allah says, مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا, that those people, their hardship came on them, calamities came on them, so much that they were shaken. Zulzilu, the same word for earthquake, right? Zilzal. They were so shaken that even the messengers and those with them asked the question, Mata Nasrullah, where is the help of Allah? And then the ayah ends with, Ala inna nasrullahi qareeb, that indeed the help of Allah is near. So Allah in this ayah is asking us, do we think that we're going to enter Jannah without these trials? And the answer is absolutely not. Now, why is that? A lot of times these trials, they're usually explained as tests, right? And that is definitely part of it. Allah tests us, right? He tests us, although He knows, obviously. But it's a test to see how is it that we are going to react. And this is said in Surah Al-Mulk, where Allah says that هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. That the reason why Allah created death and life is to test you, which of you are best in deeds. So that's absolutely part of it. But there's more to it than just the test. Allah also says in the Quran, what is translated as, we have tried them with prosperity and adversity in order that they might turn to us. That's in Ayah chapter 7, verse 168. In another ayah, Allah says, whenever we sent a prophet to a town, we took up its people in suffering and adversity in order that they might learn humility. So not only is hardship a test, hardship is also a purifier. Hardship is also a lesson, and hardship is also a training. So what does hardship do? Well, Allah says in another ayah in the Quran, what's translated as, if a wound has touched you, be sure that a similar wound has touched the others. Such days of varying fortunes we give to men and men by turns, that Allah may know those who believe and that He may take to Himself from your ranks martyr witnesses to truth. And Allah loves not those who do wrong. Allah's object is to purge those who are true in faith, to purify them, and to deprive of blessing those that resist faith. Do you think that you would enter heaven without Allah testing those of you who have struggled hard in His cause and remained steadfast? So in this ayah, again, Allah talks about the difference between a believer in hardship and a disbeliever in hardship. Now, one of the beautiful examples, if you actually look at the word that's used in the Quran when it talks about hardship, it's tamhis. Now, tamhis literally means, like, actually this is the word that was used to denote the purification. You know how when you're purifying gold, how do you purify gold?
Burn it.
You burn it, you heat it up. What happens when you heat up gold? What happens when you heat up gold is that it removes all the impurities from it. That actual is the same word that's used when Allah talks about hardship. Tamhis. لِيُمَحِّصَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. That's the ayah. لِيُمَحِّص. So that He can do to them what you do with gold. Right? So you can boil out, you can heat up and remove all of those impurities. What are the impurities? Well, attachments. Attachments is a big one. What do I mean by attachments? Well, we all have and we create attachments to things other than Allah. We create attachments to things other than Allah. We create attachments to the creation of Allah. And these attachments come in a lot of different forms. Sometimes we create attachments to our career. We create attachments to our career. We create attachments to our job. Sometimes we create attachment to material things. Sometimes, and this is one of the most hidden types of attachments, I think, especially for us women, is we create attachments to other people. So the question then is, what's wrong with attachments? Right? We're supposed to be attached to each other. We're supposed to love each other, right? What's wrong with attachments? What's wrong with attachments? And when I say attachment, I need to define what I mean. What I mean is really dependency. What I mean is something that we cannot live without, something that defines us and something that gives us fulfillment, something that we have all our hope in, something that defines our self-worth. That thing which defines our self-worth is something that we have an attachment to. Now the point is this: we should not have that attachment to anything else except for Allah. So what happens when we have attachments? Well, what happens when we have attachments is that we lose those things sometimes. How do we know when we have a false attachment? How do we know when we have a really good way to know if you have a false attachment is if you're deathly afraid of losing it. Deathly afraid of losing it. Meaning that if you lose that thing, you would be absolutely devastated. Because it's what fills you. It's what defines you. That's why people lose it when they, like, for example, if someone is attached to their career and they lose their job, they actually commit suicide. What's that about? It's because they were attached, their primary attachment was to their job, and now they lost it. So now they have no more reason to live. When someone has a false attachment to another person, well, when that person dies, or that person doesn't love you anymore, there are people who will commit suicide. Because now their reason for existing is no longer. So the point here is that our reason for existence and our attachments and that thing which we cannot live without, and that thing that defines us and fulfills us and completes us should only be Allah. So when we feel that pain, by the way, this is something really deep about pain too. Pain is a warning. What do I mean by that? When you go like, if you're like in front of the stove, okay, and you accidentally touch, and you're not looking, but your elbow accidentally touches the flame or the stove, what is it that makes you remove your arm? It's the pain. Imagine if that pain wasn't there. You would keep your arm there until your skin fell off, right? And you would just keep your arm there. You wouldn't have that warning, you need to change something. You need to remove your arm. And so we have to understand and see pain in this way. That when we feel pain in our life, it is a sign that something is wrong with our attachments. I'm going to repeat that because it's so important. When you feel an inordinate amount of pain, when you are devastated about something, it is a sign that you have a false attachment and that there's something that needs to change. So we need to understand pain in this way. We need to understand hardship in this way, that Allah is cleaning us, Allah is purifying us, Allah is detaching us from everything other than Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's a beautiful thing. And so when we understand it in this way, we will define good and bad in very differently. Because if I win $1 million tomorrow, okay, this is usually considered a really great thing, right? But if I win $1 million tomorrow and it actually pulls me away from Allah, then it is the worst punishment that could have been sent to me. On the other hand, if I lose my whole family tomorrow, I lose everything, I lose my job, I lose my house, I lose my car, I lose everything, but I still have my deen. And it actually makes me turn to Allah more and actually strengthens my attachment to Allah, then that loss was actually the best gift that could have been given to me. So defining things differently completely changes how we see our life. Think about the worst thing that ever happened to you. Think about the hardest time you ever went through. Think about it for a second. Now think about the results of that event in your life with regards to your relationship to Allah. Now that time, that really, really hard time that you went through or that you're going through right now, how is it affecting your relationship to Allah? If it's bringing you closer to Allah, then Allah has given you a gift. Allah is giving you a gift. If it pulled you, if it took you away from Allah, then it means you need to check yourself and readjust your attachments and turn back to Allah and make tawbah. Because either way, it's a sign. It's a wake-up call for us. Because if it brings us back to Allah, it's telling us, right? It's a wake-up call. It's like somebody who's sleeping, right? Who's asleep. Now, what's going to wake up that person? It's going to be something that shakes them, a loud noise, somebody pokes them, somebody pinches them. It's that pain that wakes them up out of their sleep. A lot of us are asleep, and that sleep is called ghafla. That sleep is called ghafla, which means heedlessness. And Allah talks about this in the Quran, that a lot of people are in this state of ghafla. It means when we go through our lives, but we are as if we are asleep. We don't feel Allah. We don't feel Allah. We don't see Allah in our lives. We're just very much focused on the dunya and very attached to the dunya. And all we care about is gaining in the dunya or losing in the dunya. But that's it. Now, if we are left in that state, we can get deeper and deeper in that state. But when Allah loves somebody, He shakes them out of that state. But what's going to shake them? That's where the hardship comes in. That's where the pain comes in. It's a wake-up call. It's to show us, you know what? We need to change something. We need to turn back to Allah. We need to break those false attachments. And there's another lesson in life, and that is that any time that you have an attachment to anything other than Allah, that thing will be the source of your greatest pain. Anytime you have an attachment to anything other than Allah, and I'm talking about attachment in the way I defined it. I don't mean that you love things. I mean attachment. Anytime you have an attachment to something other than Allah, that thing will cause you the most pain. So what we can do is examine our lives, and you can do this right now. Think about the thing which causes you the most pain. Think about the thing in your life that causes you the most pain. Right there is a source of a false attachment. And so that thing that's causing you pain, it's causing pain because you are attached to something other than Allah. You are dependent on something other than Allah. And what happens when you're climbing a cliff and you hang on to a twig? Well, you fall. And that's what happens when you hold on to something and you put your dependency on something other than Allah. You fall and you break. And that in and of itself is the wake-up call. The breakage, the breaking, the pain, the fact that you fell, the fact that you have this pain, that is the medicine to purify you of that false attachment. One last thing I want to tell you, because this is a workshop, I want it to be practical and I want to take your questions too. One practical thing I want to leave you with is this, because a lot of times people take these concepts and they say, okay, these are concepts, but how do I apply them in my life? And what I would say is, start out by looking at your own life and looking at the sources of pain in your life. Looking at the things which are constantly disappointing you in your life. Looking at those things which cause you the most distress and the most pain. In that thing is where your false attachment is. In that thing is where the attachment that you need to break is. Okay? Now secondly, anytime something comes to you in your life, look through it, and see Allah behind it. Anytime something happens to you in your life, look through it. Because nothing happens to you without a purpose. Nothing is happening to you except by the permission of Allah. So look through it at the lesson behind it. Look through it and ask yourself, why is Allah sending this to me? Why is Allah making this happen? So for example, if there's a person who is, who's not treating you well, or a person is causing you pain, look through that person to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah is the one who is sending you this for a reason. And most probably, what is that reason? It's supposed to be teaching you something. It's supposed to be purifying you in some way. So, anytime something happens, and it's not just hardship, and this is something which is very important, but also good things. Things which we consider blessings. Things which we consider blessings are also tests. When we get a blessing, we have to also look through it and see, what does Allah want from me? Why is Allah giving me this blessing? Allah does not do anything without a reason. Allah does not do anything without a purpose. There's not a single thing that's happening to you that didn't happen for a reason. And let me leave you with this as well. Allah tells us in the Quran, and there are different ayats about this. Allah tells us in the Quran that there are people who love others as they should only love Allah. And Allah warns us that if we take anything, there's an ayah, beautiful ayah, where Allah says that if any other thing, and He actually goes and lists 8 different things, all of which are halal, by the way. 8 different things, including our fathers, our sons, our spouses, our jobs, our homes, our businesses, all of these things, He lists them. And He says that if any of these things are more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger and striving in His way, then wait until Allah brings His command. So what is being said here is that this will be a source, you will see that this will be a source of pain for you. Not only is it a form of shirk, but you will feel it. you will feel it. If you put anything and you love anything as only Allah should be loved, you will feel it. Here's the thing though. People, a lot of times, no one's going to come and say, you know what, I love my wife more than I love Allah. Or I love my husband more than I love Allah. Or I love that guy in class more than I love Allah. No one's going to say that, right? No one's going to admit that I love my job more than I love Allah. Or that I love my children more than I love Allah. But in what way are we really saying that we love these things more than Allah? Well, I'll give you some practical examples. If we are disobeying Allah in order to please any of those other things, or in order to succeed in any of those other things, that's exactly what we're saying. So when we're saying, yeah, I'm going to take an interest loan, to help my business, or I'm going to sell alcohol to help my business, well, what are we saying? Or if we're going to say, I'm going to take off my hijab because so-and-so doesn't want to marry me unless I take off my hijab. Well, what are we saying? Well, we're saying that the pleasure of so-and-so is more beloved to me than the pleasure of Allah. If we are displeasing Allah in order to have a certain relationship with somebody, that's exactly what we're saying. If we are having a haram relationship, so any kind of relationship outside of marriage that isn't supposed to be there, any relationship between a man and a woman outside of marriage that is haram, what we are saying is that we love that person more than we love Allah. That is what we are saying in our actions. Because we're choosing to disobey Allah in order to be with that person. And so our attachment is to that person and not to Allah. And you know what happens when you do that? You always pay the consequence. You always pay the price. It will be a source of pain for you, not only in the hereafter, but in this life, in every form. So dealing with this life, the way we have to see it is this. Every single thing other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ultimately not real and is only given to us as a test. Every single thing other than Allah is ultimately not real and is just given to us as a test. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he said that they were poets at that time, right? So there was a poem, and he said that one of the poems, one of the lines from poetry that's actually true, he said, was this poem where the line says that everything other than Allah is batil. And when you look at the word batil, one of the definitions of batil is something that's not really real. What does that mean? Does it mean that you and I don't really exist? Well, no, we exist. But we, compared to Allah, it's as if we don't exist. Every single thing happening to us in our life, compared to Allah, it's as if it doesn't exist. Allahu Akbar is a very, very deep statement. Allahu Akbar doesn't just mean God is great. Allahu Akbar means God is greater. God is greater than what? God is greater than everything. God is greater than everything. God is greater than whatever hardship we're dealing with. God is greater than whatever pain we're dealing with. God is greater than that relationship that we have. God is greater than that person. God is greater than that grade, that class, that professor, whatever. God is greater than all of that. God is greater than the cars and the money and all of it. So the ultimate, again, objective here is to detach ourselves and to realize that Allah is greater than every single other thing, and that every other thing in life is only here to test us. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم سبحانك الله وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. One thing I wanted to add, and then I want to inshallah open it up for questions, is one of the examples that, okay, let me just say this. If you study the 5 pillars of Zen, basically the Prophet ﷺ told us, these 5 pillars, if you do these 5 things, you will enter Jannah. companion came to him and said, tell me, what's going to help me enter Jannah? If I just do these 5 things, if I just do these 5 things, and nothing else, will I enter, will that be enough? And he said, yes. Then that will be enough for you to enter Jannah. Well, what's that about? If you look and you study the 5 pillars of Islam, every single one of them is about detachment. Every single one of those 5 pillars is about detachment from something in the dunya. That's really deep. If you look at Shahada, right, the foundation of Islam, La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah is all about detachment. Because La ilaha illallah starts out with a negation. La ilaha, there is nothing worthy of worship. Nothing. Notice the construction. First you negate every other object of worship, every other ilah, and then you say illallah. Why? Because that's pure monotheism. Pure. There's nothing else. It's not Allah and, my job. It's not Allah and that other person. It's not Allah and anything else. It's nothing and then Allah. It's complete detachment first, and then attachment only to Allah. And then the second pillar is salah. Now salah is such a beautiful exemplification and training for detachment. Do you guys notice that salah happens 5 times a day, but not at the same time? You don't pray 5 prayers all at one time of the day. The 5 salawat are spread out throughout the day for a reason. You have to detach from the dunya in order to go pray 5 times a day. No matter what you're doing, whether you're in class, or you're studying, or you're involved, you're at the mall, there's a really great sale, you're watching, the Lakers, whatever you're doing, you have to detach and go pray. It is a lesson in detachment, because you can never really get too attached without having to leave it and turn back to your actual purpose. Because that's our actual purpose. Allah tells us, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Again, that negation. I did not create men and jinn except for any other purpose, except ubudiyya, except to become a slave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except to worship Allah. So when we're going to pray, we're going to our actual purpose. So we're leaving the dunya and going to pray, detachment. The third one, if you look at Sawm, Sawm is about detachment from what? From food and water and intimacy. So things which we naturally need, we detach ourselves from it. That's a part of the dunya. That's a detachment. Why? So you don't get too attached to the dunya, to this need, the needs of the body, right? That's dunya. That's the material world. So you don't get too attached. And then you look at zakat, detachment from what? Your money, so that you don't get too attached to it. Every single year, you have to give part of it away. And then there's hajj, detachment from what? Everything, basically. You have to leave your family, your life, your home, and you have to usually detach yourself from a whole lot of money. Like $8,000 of it, right? In order to go there. Hajj is all about detachment. Right? You leave everything. Not only do you leave your home and your family and everything, you leave your, Tommy Hilfiger, branding, right? Because when you go to Hajj, you're just wearing 2 sheets if you're men. You're just wearing 2 sheets, and everybody looks the same. You have to detach yourself from status symbols when you go to Hajj, right? Nobody has the Mercedes brand ihram. Nobody has that. They don't sell that. You can't even have stitching. There's a reason for this. It's to detach you from these things which we get attached to. So again, Allah is giving us that training. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that, inshallah, and then open it up to questions.
When you define attachments and dependency and something that gives us hope, our families, in a way, it is a source of attachment. So does that give us is that a false attachment? Because we are dependent on our families, and they do give us hope. Okay.
Again, there's a difference between loving something and being attached to it in the way that we should only be attached to Allah. Okay? So there is a reason why Allah says and includes family in this ayah when He says that if this, and this are more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger. Okay? So those things, a lot of those things are family. There's fathers, sons, and spouses. But the point here is that thing more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger? Are you defining yourself, your worth, by those things? Is your ultimate dependency and hope in those things or in Allah? Because if your ultimate dependency is on those things, for sure you will be let down. For sure. For sure. So you'll know. You'll know, because if you put your ultimate dependency on anything other than Allah, you will be constantly disappointed. And that's how you live your life. You go from one false attachment to another, and you wonder, why am I always being let down? Why are people always letting me down? That's the reason.
Not actively detach themselves from something that they may be detached with outside from the body.
Letting it go. And when I say letting it go, I don't mean like you're married, you're too attached to your husband, you get divorced. That's not what I mean. I mean internally letting it go. So, working on making, making that ultimate love and that ultimate focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not on that other thing. So, let me give you another example of how you know you have a false attachment. It's what occupies your mind the most. So think for a second, what is the thing that occupies my mind most? What do I go to sleep thinking about? What do I wake up thinking about? What do I think about during the day? What do I think about while I'm praying? This is what it is. This is what we're talking about. Is it, okay, I did this thing and Allah's going to be displeased with me, or is it, I wonder if that guy was looking at me? You know what I'm saying? Is it, oh, how much did I make today? Or, how many people, like me, don't like me? How much do I weigh? How, whatever it is. What is it that's obsessing you? What is it that's consuming you? That's a sign of your attachment. Because that's where you get your fulfillment and your self-worth.
Yasmin, it seems like sometimes a lot of us don't have an understanding of what attaching ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means. So what happens is we fall into this idea where someone gets attached to the Quran so much where it consumes their whole life, and the only thing that's important in this world is the Quran. So they'll memorize the Quran, they'll know how to learn Arabic, they'll read Arabic perfectly, and that becomes their whole life, and then they kind of forget the comprehensive aspect of activism and the rest of the world and helping the needy and this idea of social justice. Or they'll consume themselves in activism, for example, where activism becomes their source of attachment. They think that this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so I'm going to become super hyperactive, and then they mismeasure the next day because they think that their attachment is through activism only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So can you just expand on that just a bit, if you don't mind?
Thanks for bringing that up. I forgot I'm at MSA West Palm. It's activism. Okay. I think that activism definitely can become a false attachment. And what I mean by that is that sometimes, like the beautiful example you gave, is that we might be, and this is a sign of it being a false attachment or perhaps not having that sincerity, is that if we are very much active, and we're doing all these extra things, but we're having trouble doing the fara'id. We're having trouble doing the obligations, but we're doing these extra things. That's a sign that we have a false attachment, or that we have a problem with our ikhlas, our sincerity. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, for example, there are things which are obligations before anything else. One of them is salah. Okay, so let's talk about salah as an example. Okay, salah is an absolute obligation. Now, if we are going and we're planning protests, and we're at rallies, and we're doing all these things, and that's great, but we can hardly pray on time, there's a problem. There's a problem. Because if ultimately what we're doing is for the sake of Allah and Allah's pleasure, guess what? It's more important to Allah that you pray on time. So what we have to make sure is that activism is a means and not an end in and of itself. That's the main thing. That's the main take-home message that I want to give, is that activism needs to be a means and not an end in and of itself. What I mean by that is that we're not doing these events and doing this activism for the sake of it itself. We're not doing it so that we can be successful just in that event, right? We're not doing it to give ourselves some kind of fulfillment. It should not be an end in and of itself. It should just be a means to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, there's this question, it's related to means and ends, so I'm just going to talk about it for a second. And this is when you get into a situation where we feel like we're doing and doing and doing and we keep failing. Or we're praying and we're praying and we're praying. We're making dua, we're making dua, we're making dua, and our dua isn't being answered. And we get very, very frustrated. When this is happening and we're getting very frustrated by that, it's a sign that we've confused our means and our end. If our end is pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we don't care how we get there. So if we did an event, for example, and or we're trying really hard in activism and we keep on feeling we're not getting the results, we're not getting the result. Well, is our reward from Allah coming from the result, or is it coming from us doing it for the sake of Allah? See, if our attachment is to the results, then it means that we have confused the means and the end. Activism is not an end. Our point is not to have the most successful event. Our point is not to have the most people come, or even to have a result that we can see. That's not the point. Our point is just to gain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and activism is just one means to do that. So we have to be very, very careful that activism also, we have to be very careful that that we don't replace activism with this process of internal tazkiyah, this internal purification. Because if we do that, then it's just like another form of a false attachment. And you will end up seeing, just like what the brother said, where you have people, they're very, very active, but they treat their family horribly. Or they're committing other kaba'ir, like missing salah, right? Not praying. I mean, not praying on time, or missing prayers. We're not talking anymore just about small sins anymore. Now we've gotten into the realm of the kaba'ir. And not only are we in the realm of kaba'ir, abandoning salah, this is very important. Abandoning salah, and I don't care, like we say, we're in a lecture or this, abandoning salah, it actually, there are scholars who say, there are actually no scholars who say that if you commit zina, you're no longer a Muslim. There are no scholars who say that if you steal, you're no longer a Muslim. There are no scholars who say that if you commit these things, fornication, whatever, that you're no longer a Muslim. But there are scholars who say that if you don't pray, you are no longer a Muslim. So what's happening, unfortunately, is that we don't have our priorities necessarily straight. We don't understand, that, for example, this thing that we might be doing is a kabira. It's a huge sin that can actually, some scholars say, if it is done again out of rebellion or whatever. The point is, there's disagreement about how, but it can take you out of the sin. So what we really need to make sure that inshallah gives us ikhlas and gives us the ability to see the means as means and not mix the means in the end. Okay, other question?
This is more of a comment related to the question about detaching how do you detach yourself?
And I think that it's really easy to do that if you realize that everything you are attached to in this life and that you do love in this life was given to you by Allah. Like Allah is the source of everything of all of your attachments.
Yes, that's absolutely true. That's one of the ways is to realize, again, it's that idea of looking through everything in your life and seeing what's behind it, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything else is just, it's a puppet. And the other thing too, to realize, and actually I had a personal experience which really reminded me of this, and that is that I had the opportunity to be at a janazah, basically be at the burial of a human being. And what that really reminded me of is that every single thing in this life is passing away. Everything is passing away, except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything else is temporary. And so when people die, when people let you down, and people, aren't perfect, that's what it's a reminder of. It's a reminder that there's only one thing that's constant, and there's only one thing that's perfect, and there's only one thing that we can really, really put our full dependency on, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
My question is, what if you went through a hardship, but say it left you with a scar, not a physical scar, but something that if someone were to ask you about it, you would feel kind of ashamed to explain it, but you still got something good out of it, like you could feel a blessing in the end.
So what do you mean by you're ashamed? I mean, explain what you mean by the scar?
This isn't personal, but say you did drugs and left you with a physical ailment in the body that can't be healed, for example, but in the end you realize that it was wrong and you decided to stop drugs completely, but you still have something that you see in the person that, they used to do drugs. Something like that.
I mean, again, the question is, it has to do with focus. You focus on your purpose in this life, and your purpose, suppose it's a physical ailment, or it's something that takes away from your physical beauty. You realize that your purpose in this life is to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your purpose in this life is to be a slave to Allah. And this body is just a shell. It's just a container for our soul. So what really matters is the soul and the condition of the soul. It's really interesting because when we die, the only thing that actually dies is our physical body. But we don't die, right? Our soul continues to live. Our soul is eternal in the sense that it continues to live and it will live forever hereafter. So that's really what matters. The problem is that we put so much focus, and this is really interesting. I'm going to give this example. I talked about this in an article, but I think it's a good example and I think it's a funny example. And that is that with the issue of Fajr, for example, we have a lot of trouble waking up for Fajr. And by the way, this is detachment. This is detachment for our attachment to sleep, by the way. It's not by accident that Fajr is so early. It's in order to train us to detach from the love and the attachment to sleep. This is one of the attachments that we have as human beings. We also create attachments to food, which is what Psalm is about, what fasting is about. But basically, at Fajr, if at 5:30 in the morning you really need to use the bathroom, how many people are going to sleep through that? No, you won't. Nobody's going to choose, you know what, I just love sleep so much, I'm just going to wet my bed. Nobody's going to say that, right? Unless you're like 5. But you're not going to say that. How many people, you're taking an exam, right? You're in the middle of a lecture hall. Just think about this, lecture hall, right? And you really need to use the bathroom. How many people are going to be like, you know what, I can't miss this lecture, I'm just going to do it right here. No, this is funny, but just think about it. Just think about it. You're going to go outside and you're going to take care of business because, you know what, it's more important. The consequence of not going to the bathroom is just too mortifying. So you don't care what the lecture is, you don't care what the exam is, you don't care how much you love sleep at that point. You're going to do it. You're going to go use the bathroom. And ironically, at Fajr, you can get up, use the bathroom, go back to sleep and not pray. Right? We can wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Let's talk about PM time now. We'll wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning to use the bathroom, but we won't wake up to pray. So what does that mean? It means that we are putting the needs of our body over the needs of our soul. Now I'm explaining you why that's ironic. Your body is crumbling away. Your body is crumbling away. And your soul is what stays forever. And yet we are neglecting our soul, which is eternal, and taking care of our body, which is temporary. You need to remember too, that the body has needs and the soul has needs. Nobody is gonna go without food, because then they die, right? But when you go without the food of your soul is also dying. And that food of the soul is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So it was based off of the last question. You said that if there is a hardship that you issue that you push to Allah. But what if that hardship, at the same time that you feel contentment, you still feel hurt over that specific thing? What is that? A blessing and a punishment, or just?
I mean, it's a process, because tazkiyah is a process, detachment is a process. Like, just like that quote I started with of Rumi, it doesn't happen right away. You have to constantly beat that rug, right? You have to do it periodically. So it takes time, it's a process, and it's a continual process of cleaning out that dirt that we have inside of us, those attachments that we have inside of us. So, one way to get rid of resentment, one really good way to get rid of resentment is to realize that nothing happened to you except that Allah intended it to happen to you. And that nothing, and there's a beautiful hadith that says this. Think about this hadith. Allah says, this is a hadith Qudsi. He says that if the nations were to gather together to benefit you with something, they could not benefit you with that unless Allah allowed them to, except by the permission of Allah. And if the nations were to gather together to harm you with something, they could not harm you except by the permission of Allah. So when something, there's something that you can't get over, or something has hurt you, one really good way of getting over that and is to realize that it was the plan of Allah, it was the will of Allah that it happened. And that brings me, inshallah, to this hadith, inshallah, hopefully it's a take home. And that is that the Prophet ﷺ said that none of you will truly taste the sweetness of Iman until you realize that what has befallen you was never meant to pass you by. And what has passed you by was never meant to befall you. You want to come ahead? You want like this? Yeah, I got it. Speaking of cutting heads off, can I give one last question?
Whatever you want.
I have to remind me of it. I just want to leave you, what he reminded me of is the story of Prophet Ibrahim ﷺ, because we're talking about detachment. Prophet Ibrahim ﷺ, and this is the interesting thing, if you look at the stories of the prophets were all not allowed any attachments. And if there was something that could have possibly been an attachment, it was broken somehow. So I'm going to give you the example of Prophet Ibrahim ﷺ. What was the most beloved thing to Prophet Ibrahim ﷺ that could have possibly been an attachment for him? His son. What was he told to do? Why? To test him, right? To detach him. And that was a process, that was hard, and he got there, and he was willing to do that. And that's what I'm talking about. You're willing to let it go. That's the breaking of the attachment. He was willing to let it go. And what happened after that? He was allowed to keep it, because now he loved it, but was not attached to it. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.